We've got breaking news to kick us off on NFL Live. Big trade made today. Adam Schefter, what do we need to know?
Dan Graziano, David Montgomery is on his way to the Houston Texans to become the solution in the backfield that they have been looking for. He's been matched up and teamed up with Jahmyr Gibbs, but he turns 29 this offseason. He was looking for more work as part of the contract extension that he signed recently. The Houston Texans will give it to him, and there is the compensation, with the Lions getting back a 4th-round pick this year, a 7th-round pick in 27, and offensive lineman Juice Scruggs. So essentially, the Texans give up 3 components to get a player that they believe will solve their running game. Let's keep in mind, Nick Chubb is on an expiring contract and is a free agent. Woody Marks showed great promise as a rookie, and now the plan will be to have David Montgomery as the lead back, somebody who should improve the Texans' red zone play in addition with Woody Marks, and that is the type of rushing attack that C.J. Stroud has needed and been looking for in Houston.
Yeah, Joe Mixon unable to play this past year due to injury, so Texans adding a key piece there. Montgomery was in Detroit for 3 seasons, was over 1,000 yards in his first one, but his carries and yards per game both dropped off in the last 2. Last year he had 6 fewer carries and 30 fewer yards per game than he did in 2023, and he ran for 8 touchdowns, which is pretty good, but he had at least 12 in each of his first 2 seasons with Detroit. Welcome into NFL Live. Dan Graziano here with Dan Orlovsky. You heard from Adam. We have Mina Kimes, there she is, on the show today as well. Dan, let's start with the Houston side of things. What do you think of this move for the Texans?
Yeah, I like it for Houston. It puts a giant question mark on the future of Joe Mixon, who was there early on a couple years ago. His first year with Houston was great, and it's kind of been we haven't seen him play in at least the season. I think Adam intimated to, if you were going to ask me the one glaring issue for last year when it comes to Houston's offense, just in situational football, they were so bad down in the low red zone short area. I mean, so often it was 1st and goal at the 1-yard line, and they could not find a way to get the ball into the end zone. David Montgomery is still a very good back, short yardage situations. I would love to see Houston and their offense kind of develop a little bit of the identity that he ran with in Detroit. Detroit, it was downhill run game, downhill run game, downhill run game. That's kind of what I want to see Houston to adapt. So from a Houston perspective, I think what they gave up, it does make sense. I don't love the fact that they've moved off of 2 offensive linemen today, but I do like the fact that they've added a power back.
I like the back. I'll start here. I echo a lot of what Dan said. I think he's versatile. We talk about him running between the tackles in the red zone. He can also pass protect and catch passes. You know, it wasn't something he was asked to do as much in Detroit with the ascent of Gibbs. But if you go back to his time in Chicago, the last 3 seasons, he caught over 300 yards receiving in all 3. So I think that's something that's been an element needed also for this Houston offense. The advanced stats also like him. I always like to look at rushing yards over expected per carry, which tries to isolate what a back does separate from their blocking. And he was 11th amongst all running backs, high volume backs in that regard last season. But, and this also echoes what Dan said, the offensive line is a massive concern. It feels like, much like last offseason, they're almost wiping the slate clean and saying, we're going to start over for much of this position group, which is fine, but you tried that last year, and it took a second. And I'm not saying, Scruggs probably necessarily was someone you wanted to keep. Howard, I feel a little bit more positive about. Yeah. But you're asking this offense, front office to once again rebuild a lot of this offensive line. And if they're not successful in doing so, I wouldn't be surprised if this run game struggles just like it did for most of last year.
Yamina referencing Titus Howard, Houston agreeing to trade him to the Browns earlier today. So, well, I mean, they did do this last year. They completely overhauled the offensive line. Wasn't good enough in 2024, but it also wasn't good enough in 25. So what do they need to do there?
I think that, listen, the offensive line was better in 25 than it was in 24. Neither of us are saying here that this was, the best offensive line in football. They were really bad in 24. They got periodically better throughout 25. I also think the scheme under Nick Caley got a little bit more repetitive and complementary to their people. This is an offensive line. I think what you're starting to see, and we watched it last year throughout the season. They started to figure out who they wanted to be run game wise. It was a little bit of a mirror to what the Los Angeles Rams became last year. I think this, once again, the addition of David Montgomery reaffirms that. but they need to add probably 2 good starting offensive line pieces to this unit.
Yeah, Dan's right. The offensive line did play better. The run blocking did improve as the year went on, as they become more of a downhill run game, which, by the way, Montgomery is a good fit for. I'm looking at this draft right now, and it is a very strong offensive line draft, in my opinion. So I think there's potential there for them, and maybe not even staying put at 28 if there's a player that they really like being a little bit active. But that is something that has to be addressed for sure. It is the number one priority for this football team right now.
Adam, you want a final word on this one?
Well, 2 other things that I think are pertinent to running backs in their respective cities right now. We brought up Joe Mixon's name, and I don't think that he's expected to be back in Houston for another season. Obviously missed last year with the ankle, foot injury, whatever it was. Always a great mystery surrounding Joe Mixon, and as productive as he's been in Houston and Cincinnati, it certainly sounds like the Texans are moving on from him. And in Detroit, without David Montgomery, here's a leader. Here's somebody who is very productive, somebody very popular. They're without him right now. And the focus is going to be on Jahmyr Gibbs. And this team is going to look to sign him to a contract extension this offseason. They could look to add multi-years to his deal, lucrative extension for one of the most explosive players in all of football. So it looks like Gibbs gets more time in Detroit on a bigger deal. Mixon's time in Houston is coming to an end. And David Montgomery is now going to spearhead the Texans' rushing attack into 2026.
Montgomery had 33 rushing touchdowns in his 3 seasons with Detroit. Over that same period of time, the Houston Texans as a team had 34 rushing touchdowns. So he does seem to be something they need. Just inside 24 hours now till the deadline for teams to put the franchise tag on players. We've seen a couple already. Adam, who are the names we should be focusing on here over the next 24 hours?
Well, I think there's some questions about who's going to get tagged right now. We'll start in Indianapolis. The Colts are trying to get Daniel Jones signed to a long-term deal. If they don't, I think the transition tag could very much be in play here for the Indianapolis Colts. That would be about $8 million less than the franchise tag, but the Colts have 2 players they really want to keep. Alec Pierce, the wide receiver, Daniel Jones, the quarterback. We'll see how they decide to figure it out here in the next 24 hours. Meanwhile, the New York Jets don't expect to let Breece Hall get out of their building, and they're talking about tagging him if they can't get done a long-term deal. I would think it would be a franchise tag. I know people have brought up the transition tag. I think if they're going to tag Breece Hall, it's probably going to be with a franchise tag, but they're trying to get a deal done by the 4 p.m. Eastern deadline tomorrow. And as for the Seattle Seahawks and the Super Bowl MVP, Kenneth Walker, as we said last week, a couple of weeks ago, unlikely that they're going to tag him. It's looking like he's going to be allowed to test the free agent market. The Seahawks have so many players that they need to retain. They want to re-sign Jackson Smith-Njigba. They want to re-sign Devin Witherspoon. They want to keep together their core. And running backs, as much as they like Kenneth Walker and as much as they know he meant to this team, there's so many needs that have to be addressed and only so many dollars you have to spend, which could result in Walker not being tagged and being allowed to truly test the free agent market next week.
We saw one running back last week re-sign, Javonte Williams in Dallas, but it sounds like Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker in line to get even more than he got, especially if they hit the open market. Mina, what do you think the market looks like for Ken Walker?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he wants and whether or not any team's willing to meet it, especially as you look at the Javonte Williams deal, which was about $8 million per year, right? If Walker wants twice that, and same with Hall, which is a bit more than the tag, that's a tough choice for a team to make. There's a lot of really good, I would call them middle-class free agent running backs. Kenny Gainwell, Tyler Algier, Rico Dowdle, for example, and to pay a premium at the position for a player who's explosive in Walker, but maybe not necessarily efficient, it's going to take a specific type of team that not only has money, but I would say doesn't have many other needs on their roster, competing needs that they want to spend that money on.
Yeah. Jacksonville comes to mind as a potential team if it's not Seattle. I'd also say the Kansas City Chiefs, Carolina Panthers, because of Rico being a free agent. I think the Panthers are interesting for going up and get Jeremiah Love, and we'll get that later in the show as well. But Kenneth Walker's a good back. And, you know, Jacksonville, Travis Etienne is a free agent. And so you're looking at teams that have, you know, these free agent backs that are in good places. I think it's going to come down to Mina's point of like, okay, what back gets what? Is there more money somewhere else? And is there an emotional attachment or a feeling like, oh, you didn't give me what I wanted, this other organization will? Because there's this kind of group of Rico Dowdle, Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne, probably Walker at the very top of that list. But this is a kind of a group that's going to have to find a home for each other. And I think he'll have a good market. I'd like to see him back in Seattle, but we'll see how much he costs.
We will. Last year, only 2 players got franchise tagged. It was T. Higgins in Cincinnati and Trey Smith, the Kansas City Chiefs guard. Both of them got signed to long-term deals, so nobody had to play on the franchise tag. That's down. There were 8 tags issued in the 2024 offseason and 14 in 2020. 2 is the lowest number since the franchise tag was introduced, or tied the lowest number since the franchise tag was introduced in 1993. Yeah, we'll see how many more get used in addition to the 2 that I already have. I want to welcome you into NFL Live. If you're just joining us, we started early because of spring training baseball. Last week, Jeremy Fowler and I went to Indianapolis for the Combine, and we put together an article based on some of the stuff we heard at Indianapolis, some of the intel on what some of these teams are planning. So let's start in Minnesota. What are they doing at quarterback? Well, they're trying to thread kind of a tough needle. They're not ready to give up on J.J. McCarthy, 2024 first-round pick, who had a rough year last year, but they don't want to just make him the starter. So they're going to look for a veteran, who can play, but also might be able to get McCarthy's attention, maybe help snap him back into being what they thought he was going to be when they drafted him. So look out if Geno Smith were to get cut in Las Vegas, Kyler Murray were to get cut in Arizona, and they could have them in Minnesota on like a minimum salary type deal. If they don't get somebody like that, maybe Kirk Cousins goes back there. They looked at Joe Flacco last year. They looked at Aaron Rodgers last year. So a lot of options for Minnesota at the quarterback position. They just don't know what it's going to be. Adam, what more can you add?
Well, Dan, you laid out a lot of quarterback options. And, oh, by the way, great job by you and Jeremy in that notebook. Lots of intel in there. But I would say this, that I think when you're looking at the Vikings quarterbacks, the 2 most realistic options at this point in time would seem to be Kyler Murray and Geno Smith if he winds up being released in Las Vegas. And that still is up in the air right now. But Kyler Murray's future in Arizona is tenuous at this point in time. If he does get released, he could come in on a cheap contract. And I think the idea of being in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell, with J.J. McCarthy would be appealing to Kyler Murray. And it would be a place that would be a destination that would give the Vikings an advantage over the other teams. And the same things that are true for Kyler Murray in Minnesota will be true of Geno Smith if he winds up being released in Las Vegas, which there are no guarantees of that yet. The Raiders have not made a decision. They have to pay him $8.5 million guaranteed money anyway, so they're sorting through whether or not they're going to be keeping Geno, knowing that everybody expects them to take Fernando Mendoza at 1. But no doubt the Vikings are going to be bringing in one of these quarterbacks. It's probably going to be somewhat of an established quarterback, somebody that's going to be cap-friendly to bring in. But there's going to be a quarterback move that's made here in Minnesota in the days to come.
Mina, if it is Kyler Murray, former #1 overall pick, who's had some measure of success in the league as a starter in Arizona, you like that idea for Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love it for Kyler Murray, right? Don't pursue the biggest contract necessarily, pursue the situation, rebuild your value. But I also really like it for Minnesota. Guys, I feel like the league is way too low on Kyler Murray right now based on the way, first, Arizona is obviously willing to absorb a lot of a big cap hit to release him, but also the way he's talked about. When the Vikings signed Sam Darnold, and you look back at the last 2 seasons he played, he had kind of a gap year in San Francisco. Those 2 years before he became a Viking in QBR and e-paper dropback, he was 44th and 42nd. If you look at Kyler's last 2 years, and so this is just 2024 and 2025, he's dead average. And I'm not even including like his better years in Arizona when he was like a legitimate MVP candidate 4 or 5 years ago. So I would argue that the floor you get with him is a lot higher than people think. And then the ceiling, as we know from his earlier years, is much higher than that. And I think it would be a very smart bet for Minnesota, given that it won't cost a lot. And I'd be interested in seeing it personally.
Yeah, I like Kyler in Minnesota. I don't love Kyler in Minnesota. And this is the reason why. Kyler, in his own words, has said, I still want to be a playmaker. I remember calling Monday Night Football last year and having conversations with Kyler. And how do we get better as an offense? He's like, I need the ball in my hands more. I need to go be a playmaker and use my legs more to impact the game. That's not really how this offense is built to be played. It's not really how Kevin O'Connell wants his quarterback to play. He wants his quarterback to be the point guard. I just need you to be average because everything else is going to be above average. And so the question is, will Kyler get to that? Would he be willing to do that in trying to repair his reputation? Because I would tell you, like, talent-wise, MK, no question, give me Kyler over Geno with where they are right now. Stylistically, I'd probably tell you, give me Geno over Kyler.
Yeah, because he can be that point guard?
Geno's been that. He's been more willing to be that in rhythm, in timing, pocket passer, allow the offense to be the star rather than me.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing, Mina, right? Like these guys that come from that McVay, Shanahan kind of, they know how to get receivers open. It's just a matter of, hey, you got to do what gets us 4 fresh downs, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then you start thinking about names like Mac Jones. If he was a free agent, Dan, I would have thrown his name out there.
Sure.
He'd be my number one guy.
And everything we're hearing suggests San Francisco is going to ask for quite a bit to part ways with him, understandably, given their injury history. And I think that, to me, really, as much as from a scheme perspective it makes sense, I don't know about giving up, serious draft capital for a Mac Jones over those other 2 guys just because of the total value proposition.
Yeah, there's 2 teams that I would be kind of convinced would be ideal places for Mac Jones, Atlanta being one and Minnesota being the other. If I'm Minnesota, I still am of the thought process, I need a starting quarterback.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to come in and maybe compete with JJ. I can still believe in JJ. I can still have a hopeful future for JJ. You can't waste 2 years in a row of Hall of Fame wide receiver. So if I'm Minnesota, yes, the first call is I'm calling San Francisco. Is it even a thought? What would it cost? And then I do think you have to have the Aaron Rodgers conversation. I think that Aaron Rodgers can play good, solid football. Now, if you tell me no because you've moved on because of the age, I understand that. But those are probably my first 2 calls in this situation. I know Shefty's going to tell me, Dan, stop talking about Mac Jones. I'm still making the call.
Shefty, is that what you're going to tell Dan?
Well, Dan, I'm going to say this. Like, the Niners have no intention of trading Mac Jones, and I don't know whether it's the fact that other teams know that they won't do that, or the fact that they're concerned that the price might be too high, but there hasn't been exactly a whole lot of calls, incoming calls and activity about it. Look, they don't want to trade him. They don't intend to trade him. But as we're seeing with Max Crosby and A.J. Brown, 2 players who their teams also don't want to, you'll always listen, but the price would have to be right. And no team so far has been willing to make an offer that would make the 49ers even think about doing anything, which is why I think we're back to the same spot with Mac Jones being in San Francisco, which is what they want, with no interest in moving on from him. Aaron Rodgers, again, I think the Steelers have been waiting for an answer middle of this month. The free agent market begins next week. So if you're Aaron Rodgers, you can, but it's not ideal to drag it out till the summer the way he did last year. And I think the Pittsburgh Steelers with a new head coach would like an answer sooner rather than later. And the feeling is that they'll probably get an answer sooner rather than later. And we'll see whether or not Aaron Rodgers comes out of retirement or free agency or however you want to call it to play another season.
Well, Pittsburgh needs an answer, but so does Minnesota, just to put a button on that. They were 29th in team QBR last year, ahead of only Tennessee, Las Vegas. Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson participated in the throwing portion of the NFL Combine on Saturday. Simpson, who battled injuries over the back half of the season, is widely expected to be the 2nd quarterback taken when the draft heads to Pittsburgh next month. So let's speculate on a team, shall we? With Matthew Stafford's future beyond this year in question, many will look at the Rams as a potential landing spot for Simpson. LA has 2 first-round picks, including the one they got from the Falcons last year. That's 13th overall. They'll have 4 total picks in the first 3 rounds, all at 93 or sooner. Rams have only drafted 1 quarterback in the last 9 years. That was Stetson Bennett, their 4th-round pick in 2023. So, Dan, with Matthew Stafford, obviously, closer to 40 than 30, maybe the end of his career closer than the beginning. Should LA be thinking about a quarterback in the draft, early in the draft this year?
Super Bowl over future. I firmly believe that. You know that you are a player away from jumping Seattle and maybe overcoming them for next year. You have so many of your pieces back. And coming off of the season that you saw Matthew Stafford have, you need to add, realistically, a starting high-level corner and a speed pass rusher. I'll never get over Booger McFarland telling me last year, the Rams got a bunch of good bull rushers. They need a speed rusher, a guy that can win right now. And so this defense that led them down or let let them down last year, really on that final stretch and certainly in that NFC Championship game. As much as I love the pairing of Ty Simpson and Sean McVay, and it makes sense for 2028-29, you have 2 first-round picks. The Super Bowl is so much more important than your future.
Yeah, I'm of the same mind. You go all in. This was pretty clearly the second best team in football last season. And it was a team with, I think, weaknesses that they can address because they were so clear. Pass defense being the primary need. The Rams haven't really invested a lot at the cornerback position in recent years, going back to really since when they traded for Jalen Ramsey. I think they need to be similarly aggressive this offseason.
Correct.
Both with their early draft picks. I would also look at free agency. A guy like a Jamel Dean, for example, who's older, but, you can bring on this year as like an all-in type player, the final piece. To me, it is worth investing heavily there. I would also, though, look to add on the offensive line and maybe another receiver, but pass defense was so obviously the problem with this team, and they do have the resources this offseason to fix it.
If not the Rams, then where should Simpson be taken, and who do you have in mind for him?
If I were the Arizona Cardinals at number 3, I would try and trade down to somewhere in that teen area and take him. Yes, 3 is probably too rich, because of the starts, but Arizona trading down from 3 and getting him somewhere in the teens, I like. 6 at Cleveland, I still sit there and say probably a little too high, even though I love the young man's game. And then you're getting into that conversation. I will once again sit here and tell everybody, if you're the Miami Dolphins and you are deciding to move on from Tua and Malik Willis, it may not work financially for you, I would entertain drafting him at number 11. I do think that if you are really liking Ty Simpson, it probably makes sense that you're going to have to jump the Rams to feel comfortable above 13.
Interesting. Miami will be looking for a low-cost solution if they're carrying $99 million in dead money.
Exactly.
If they cut Tua Tagovailoa. I want to go back to that article I co-wrote with Jeremy Fowler where we go through the info we learned at last week's Combine. I urge everyone to go read it. It's extremely well written and full of great information. I want to talk about Baltimore, where the Ravens would like to get a contract extension done with quarterback Lamar Jackson, whose salary cap number goes up to $74.5 million this season. Haven't made much progress there yet. They have automatic conversion rights in the contract, so they can, convert salary to bonus and knock down that cap number without his permission, add some void years on the end of the deal. But they prefer to do it via a contract extension. Of course, as we all know, Lamar Jackson does not use an agent, and that has complicated contract conversations in the past. So we know he's going to be on the Ravens, whether it's on a new contract or just playing around with the current one. So with him locked in, what does Baltimore need to focus on this offseason on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, interior offensive line, specifically if they lose Tyler Linderbaum as well, but really their guards. That was one of the storylines of last year. As poor as some of the parts of their offense played, their interior offensive line fell apart. And if they're going to lose their star center in free agency, they're going to need 3 new starting interior offensive linemen in Baltimore. That's got to be their focus.
All right, to Indianapolis, where the Colts have 2 prominent free agents they're trying to keep. Those would be quarterback Daniel Jones and wide receiver Alec Pierce. You can only tag 1 player per year, so the hope is to get a long-term deal done with at least one of them before tomorrow's tag deadline. If they don't get Daniel Jones signed, it's possible they use the transition tag on him, which would then allow Pierce to hit the open market, where he's expected to generate significant interest. Mina, Shefty talked about this situation a little bit earlier in the show. What do you make of the way the Colts are handling this?
We'll see what they do. If they were to tag Jones and let Pierce walk, that would confuse me, frankly, because it would imply that they're afraid of Daniel Jones hitting the market. But Daniel Jones injured his Achilles in week 14, so I guess I just don't quite understand how the market for him would be that robust amongst teams that need a quarterback immediately, whereas Pierce, I expect to have a very robust market given his skill set and how good he was last year as a deep threat. So I'll be honest, if they were to go that path, it's not something that I personally would agree with, and I would find a little bit confusing. If you're Indy, you have to be scared to death of Minnesota.
Yep.
Scared to death of them, because I firmly believe that if he became somewhat available, Minnesota would absolutely jump all over him, even with the injury.
Even though he's not playing for.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know what the time frame, but I still think that you're you're banking on him or you're betting on him and being available for a chunk of the season. He might miss, certainly the start of the season. But I still think if you're Indianapolis, you've got to be very – and that's why when I hear the transition tag, I'm shocked that Indianapolis would roll that dice on that player because they finally found one. And if they transition tag him, I just wouldn't be surprised.
It does sound like they're trying to get a deal done by tomorrow's deadline. I do believe Minnesota would be interested if somehow he did get loose from Indianapolis, but maybe then they'd have to add someone else who could play early in the season. Adam, what do you got on the Colts?
Well, listen, here's why the transition tag would make some sense. The franchise tag is about $45 million. The transition tag is about $8 million cheaper, $37 million. The Vikings still are cap strapped. They don't have a whole lot of financial flexibility. So what team out there right now would be willing to step out to create a creative offer sheet for Daniel Jones that the Colts would have a tough time matching? I think that's what the Colts would be gambling on if they went the transition route to try to save $8 million against their cap that they could use elsewhere on their roster. Now, we'll see ultimately what they do. They're still trying to get him signed to a long-term deal, and maybe that will happen here in the next 24 hours. But certainly the transition tag would be in play in addition to the franchise tag.
Yeah, just to remind people, franchise tag means someone could come in with an offer, but they'd have to give you 2 first-round picks if he went to that team. Transition tag, you don't get anything if he takes an offer from another team that you don't want to match. So that, in addition to the price, the big difference. Coming up next of Hoops. Back to our breaking news today on NFL Live as Adam Schefter jumps in. An Iowa State running back got traded today, speaking of Iowa State. Schefter, what do you got?
Well, Dan, a running back trade with ramifications for both teams. The Detroit Lions traded David Montgomery to the Houston Texans for a 4th-round pick this year, a 7th-round draft pick next year, and offensive lineman Juice Scruggs. And so now it's a situation where Detroit gets back that particular compensation. The Texans get a running back to improve their red zone, to work as their lead back, to help complement the rookie running back Woody Marks, with Nick Chubb now expected to become a free agent here next week. And the Texans feel like they've upgraded in the backfield with a 29-year-old running back who was one of the heart and souls of the Detroit offense and locker room. Exactly the kind of player that the Texans were looking for. The Lions, in turn, obviously know that Jahmyr Gibbs has to be the guy. They'd like to try to pay him during the offseason, become one of the top paid running backs in all of football. Their offense is going to be focused and centered around him. There weren't enough touches last year for David Montgomery. He'll get those touches in Houston, where the Texans are likely to move on from Joe Mixon as well. So the Texans upgrade their backfield. The Lions save some money and obviously hand off more work to Jahmyr Gibbs. And we have another trade that obviously has big effects on both teams.
We talked about the Houston side of this earlier in the show. Dan, you like this move for Detroit?
No, but I understand it. We've talked about this with Detroit and this concept of, have they missed their Super Bowl window? Mm-hmm. And while you can have the appreciation for there's a great foundation built in Detroit, we're going to start to see this kind of happen as they've had this 3-year run where we've had unbelievable productive players that were cheap. And all those productive players are not going to be cheap anymore. Mm-hmm. Jahmyr Gibbs is obviously the first name that's going to come to mind. Jack Campbell is going to have to be paid. Branch is going to have to be paid. So, there's a lot of young players talent-wise on this team that Brad Holmes, their general manager, has done a great job of evaluating, and they've done a great job of developing. Now it's time to pay them. So it's almost like going to start this new cycle in Detroit again of, okay, we got to find a bunch of new young players again through that draft process that are as good as the ones we've had over the past 2 or 3 seasons, but also come at that expensive rate. I think this is just the beginning of some of this almost roster overturn in Detroit. Yeah, that 2023 draft that they crushed, they're now paying the bill. You didn't even mention Sam Laporta. There's 4 guys from that class that they have to pay. To that end, we have new on NFL Live, some more movement out of Detroit. Lions releasing offensive lineman Graham Glasgow. That saves them $5.5 million against this year's salary cap as they start to undertake some of that work they need to do to get under. Plenty of other news to get to here. Adam, take us through the rest of your top stories today, starting with another trade the Houston Texans made today.
They sent Titus Howard to the Cleveland Browns in exchange for a 5th round draft pick. The Browns are trying to rebuild their entire offensive line. Titus Howard will go fill one of the tackle spots as Houston continues to continually remake its offensive line. Titus Howard has a new extension in Cleveland, 2 years, $45 million, $22.5 million a year. And the Kansas City Chiefs have moved on from their right tackle, Jawan Taylor. A cap savings here of about $20 million against their cap. They'll look to find another tackle as Jawan Taylor now becomes a free agent. Obviously, the idea would be if they can't find a trade partner, that's not expected to happen. So he is expected to be released before the start of the league year. And the Washington Commanders have informed former Pro Bowl quarterback Marshawn Lattimore that they intend to release him before the start of the new league year. The release will save about $18.5 million against the cap. You'll remember all the hype that came along with the Commanders trading for Lattimore 2 seasons ago at the trade deadline from New Orleans. The Commanders felt like they had a rare opportunity with Jaden Daniels. They went for it. They reached the NFC Championship game, but a couple of years later, they're now moving on from Lattimore to save money against the cap. Lattimore will join a crowded cornerback free agent pool.
We'll see more moves like this as the week goes along and teams work to get under the cap ahead of free agency. More than 25,000 players have played in the NFL in the league's history, but only 240 of those have crossed the goal line into the end zone to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. Over the next year, which is the year of the Super Bowl at ESPN, we're going to tell the stories of those players and the moments they achieved immortality on football's biggest stage. This week, Steve Smith Sr. explains how the moment he became the 140th player to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl was a childhood dream come true. Oregon tight end Kenyon Sadiq certainly helped himself in the eyes of scouts last week in Indy. Sadiq had a dazzling on-field workout, running the 40-yard dash in 4.39 seconds, which is the fastest ever for a tight end. Also set a tight end record in the vertical jump, though that would be broken later in the day. And his broad jump was 11 feet 1 inch. Sadiq showed off at the combine that he's an athlete the likes of which we haven't seen before. Since 2003, which is how far back we have combine data, he's the only player who has weighed in at least 240 pounds and run a 40 in 4.4 seconds or less and have at least a 40-inch vertical leap. Last year, Sadiq caught 8 touchdowns and averaged 11 yards per reception. So, Mina, what is it about Kenyon Sadiq, other than all that stuff I just said, that is making teams fall in love with him?
I think the combination of the clearly insane athleticism with how well-rounded he is as a tight end. Dan, all season long, we talked about how many of the best offenses in football were putting multiple tight ends on the field, getting teams, defenses to play base, and then throwing on them. Seattle being an excellent example, the Super Bowl winners. Kenyon Sadiq is the type of player that allows you to measure in that, in part because of the field stretching ability you see reflected in the 40 time, of course, but also he is a willing and capable blocker. That's something you're not going to see in the combine, right? But it's all over his tape. And when I think of a team like Philadelphia that tried building out its under center play action game last year, to me, he was the missing piece. You know, adding is kind of a tight end who can actually block and threaten in the run game, but then also you can use to create mismatches. I don't know if he'll still be there where they're picking, but if he, especially behind LA, the Chargers, but if he is, to me, that would be a dream situation for the player and the team.
Yeah, I love him in Philly. I love him in New England. I love him in Washington. I love him in Kansas City. Yeah. I love him in New Orleans. There is a straight line speed element to his game that is just different at that position. I also love the fact that his lower half is legit. He is not like this long, lean, straight line speed guy. There's a lower half to him that looks like an NFL tight end. And I agree with Mina, like the complete element of his game. But if you're those teams and you're sitting there going, how do we really help everyone talks about the wide receiver, and they've got 2 good tight ends. But you think of Josh McDaniels using him as a piece, or you go Washington needing to add another pass catcher with Jaden Daniels in his 3rd year, and that offense with David Blau as their play caller, there's a lot of teams that make a ton of sense, and it's all about like the usage of him schematically and how he fits.
The other thing I'll say about taking him and potentially taking him high, right, maybe even the top half of the 1st round, we have seen a real evolution, I would say in the last 5 years, of tight ends being impactful in the NFL immediately. That used to not be the case. You remember, it used to be a position that took a long time, but I think because offensive play callers have gotten so much better at finding ways to integrate them into the offense early on. I mean, just look at last year alone, not just Warren and Loveland in the first round, but like a Harold Fannin Jr., who was, you know, an undersized player, kind of unique and ended up being impactful immediately. So if I was one of those teams considering taking him, I would also be encouraged by what we've seen out of young tight ends being so good, so fast in the NFL.
I was just going to say, Loveland, the comparison, the way that Loveland was used kind of building up season-wise for Chicago. If you're Philadelphia, if you're Washington, that's the vision, is you are building this guy into the person that you are almost running your pass game through November and December.
We'll see. Obviously, he didn't do anything on the field in Indy last week to hurt his status. Kenyon Sadiq looking like a first-round pick that'll make someone's fan base very, very happy. I want to go back to this article Fowler and I did. I tell you guys about this article Fowler and I did?
I've heard there's a couple good writers.
Yeah, pretty good. Not bad. Let's go to the L.A. where the Chargers have some decisions to make on their defensive line. Two edge rushers, Khalil Mack and Odafe Owe, were extremely productive for the Chargers last year. Owe had 12.5 sacks after they got him from Baltimore mid-season. Both eligible for free agency. Chargers would love to have both of them back, but they have other significant needs, including on the interior of the offensive line. And the Chargers seem to believe this year's free agent class and draft are both deep with potential answers at the edge rusher position. So there's a chance that they don't bring either one back and they find ways to replace them. Mina, how would you handle this if you were the Chargers?
Yeah, it would be really nice to keep both of them because in the second half of the season, after the trade for Owe, the four-man rush really got going with, of course, Tuli Tuipulotu, Loveland. All three of these players were on the field together, by the way. The devil is in the details, I think, was Khalil Mack. How much does he want? The length of contract, obviously, nearing the end of his career. The Chargers do have a lot of money, but as you alluded to, major needs on the interior of that offensive line. So I think they have to see how the total picture fits together in terms of whether or not the two pass rushers are asking for too much.
Yeah, Dan mentioned Tyler Linderbaum before. Chargers GM Joe Ortiz comes from Baltimore. Maybe that's a spot. Hey, veteran wide receiver Mike Evans is eligible for free agency, and his agents recently told our Kimberly Martin that he does intend to play in 2026 at age 33 and that he plans to test free agency. Buccaneers have a very strong relationship with Mike Evans and have been in contact with him. They would like to have him back, but there is a chance that he gets better offers elsewhere, and the Bucs have drafted a bunch of talent at the wide receiver positions the last few years. Last year in free agency, they re-signed Chris Godwin. I think there's a chance, Dan, that Mike Evans could finish his career in a different uniform. How do you see this playing out?
Buffalo, San Francisco, and Washington. Those would be my three teams that would be at the highest when it comes to these are the teams that should at least think about acquiring Mike Evans. I want to be honest, it's hard for me to envision him in somewhere else other than Tampa, just because there's that emotional element, that human element. He's been there for his whole career, a Hall of Famer. He's been so impactful on and off the field if you know everything he did within the community. But if it comes to that point, I love him in Buffalo. I love him in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Evans, 33 years old. I'm always a little bit wary trying to make projections about players, but he's different. I will never say he's done. It's kind of like Derrick Henry for me, right?
Yeah.
He's just been so productive for so long. Dan's teams are good options. I'll also throw out another one, Kansas City. There is a need there. I think he wants to sign sort of a mercenary-type contract, maybe win another Super Bowl. If they were to go running back or tight end in the first round, this could be a way to augment that wide receiver core, add some size to the position, and I'm sure he'd love catching passes from Patrick Mahomes.
Hard to imagine Mike Evans in a different uniform,
Isn't it?
But he will generate significant interest on the free agent market if Tampa lets him get there. We'll see how it all plays out. When we come back on NFL Live, Dan wants